Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at how we can create width in the backswing without compromising the movement at our wrists. We're going to primarily focus on the width and the path of the hands in the takeaway phase of the golf swing. Hopefully you'll find something here to help you with your game. Thanks once again for tuning in. So we had a great question following my previous video related to wrist movement in the takeaway, and it was, if a player was looking at creating width in their swing, would it not be a conflict to allow the club head to move past the hands, or to set, just to keep the terminology simple, early in the swing? Is there a conflict between being wide and allowing the wrists to set? And I think this is such a great topic because typically the movement of the wrists gets a lot of attention when we look at being wider. And it is obvious to say that if we were to not allow the wrists to move upward in this way here, the club head would be further from the body. So we can create width with the sweet spot from the body by taking out the set of the wrists, or I simply like to call it with supports in the club, because I like the analogy of, in the backswing, we're going to look at getting the club into a position where it feels light, so we can manage it as we move the mass of the club towards the top of the golf swing. So I like to really build a player's movement around where they feel the club is light, where they have good control of it. At the same time, I do like them to have width. So I do like to keep the wrists moving in a way that allows them to support the club, but at the same time I want them to create width, because the hands very much on where they are in space influence how the body is moving. So if we get the hands in the right place in space, then we're often going to see really good responses in how the body moves. So very simply, I'm just going to take my setup position here and give you just a couple of cues that you could use for your takeaway. So let's just say you get to hip high with your hands. How much width can we create between the hands and your lead hip? So if I was to move through backswing here, and I'm really trying to create width here between my hands and my lead hip, and I'm just going to add one other little restraint there from a movement standpoint, is like, can we keep the head inside the trail foot? So I'm keeping my head inside the trail foot, I'm getting as much distance between my hands and my lead hip, and that's my takeaway there, doing that. Okay, so to get there, I've actually had to allow the club head to move first to do that, because the path of the hands has not moved up too quickly. So and in the start, we've seen it with a lot of players, I mentioned this in the previous video, is the hands actually move slightly down. And that's because in creating the width, we're lengthening very much this lead side, and it's right from the get-go, we're going to see that lead side lengthen there, and you can see that it encourages, or actually drives, the hands a little down. So the hands are moving down, we're going to have to get the club head working upwards. I've actually had that little exercise I did there. I've actually had a student of mine actually create that themselves. If you kind of grab the bottom of the grip with two of your fingers there, and as the lead hand moves down, if you just support the club nicely with those two fingers, you get just a nice movement there in your lead hand. And I find a lot of players, if you get the right movement around the lead hand while you're creating width there, you're going to be able to support the club quite nicely. If there's not enough, let's just say, of the right movement around this lead wrist, the club is going to feel very, very heavy. So right here, again, before the lead hand gets to hip high, we should be able to support it in the left hand there, or in the lead hand, I should say. Okay, so there's a few of the pointers there. Let's look at how we can just apply them. So this also ties in perfectly to the dynamics that I like to see in the backswing, and I did relate that the hand movement very much has a good influence on the body, but from a dynamic standpoint, the stretch of the way we want to create in backswing, if we're nice and wide with the hands, we're going to create that nice long stretch across the lead side here. It's also going to, with that path of the hands being wide before hip high, you can see how that's encouraging the body to sit down. Okay, so simply, if you go out and play around with this, try and tie it into, or I'd say explore tying this into the dynamics of like creating stretch in your backswing, but then also at the top, feeling as though you can stretch even more in the start of downswing, something that I've included in a number of videos around transition. So if we get the takeaway there, by the time the hands are hip high, we're nice and wide, we've created a nice amount of distance between the hands and the lead hip, From there, we've got the club supported, so we can get to the top of backswing, and then we can create more stretch. So the hand width is so important for us creating the stretch there, and we're able to keep the structure of the wrists at the same time and support the club. So those two elements that often people feel are in conflict, the width and the wrists, we want them to work together. Okay, so let's just hit a shot here and see how we could apply those two philosophies. So if I set up the ball, if I step to the ball here, I'm going to feel as wide as I can there, hands to lead hip, stretch, create more stretch, and then I'm going to feel how I'm going to move into impact. Let's hit one. Okay, so I hit that a little heavy. The reason I wanted to just leave the camera rolling there is because that's actually the error that I see very much the most with players when they're working on width. So it's simply because often in creating the width, one, it might change the position of the head, and two, it's just you can get very focused on how you're moving back and not the attention that you need to moving through. So this time all I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little slower through backswing. I'm going to have more awareness of how I'm going to move through all the way to my finish. So when working on this, I would say if you're working on width and if you're working on takeaway, very clear and very important to be clear when you're hitting how to get back to impact and how to get through to your finish. A little bit better on that one.